Chapter 10. Pontifex flexed his fingers, first in his right hand and then his left. Between them he gripped the handle of his hover guard glider. It was a simple device, not unlike the unmanned aerophans. A lightweight hollow frame was constructed in the shape of bird wings. Between this frame stretched a fine woven metal fabric that billowed slightly in the wind. The whole thing was attached to the rider's back with a set of straps and a buckle. To Pontifex's left rode Marek, on his right, Orland. Behind the three followed 4 dozen of Marek's finest elite guardsmen. Pontifex looked to his left. "Do you see them?" Marek nodded.
"The human woman doesn't appear to be with them."
"That doesn't matter now. We are after the elf girl. The Guardian will be very pleased that we brought her in. The Vedalken people will be well rewarded for our service."
Pontifex smiled.
Yes, indeed."
"My lord,"
said Marek, pointing down at a group of foot travellers.
"they have some sort of beast with them."
Pontifex narrowed his eyes. The reflection of the moon's light off the metallic plane made it hard to pick up shapes and impossible to distinguish colours. It did, however, appear as if the elf rode atop some large creature.
"If she thinks she can outrun us with her mount, she is mistaken."
Marek pointed.
"What should you have us do?"
Pontifex glanced back up at his troops and looked back down at the elf girl and her party.
"We split up. Marek, you take 2 dozen warriors and swoop around behind them."
He hitched his thumb over his shoulder towards Orland.
"The councillor and I will keep the rest of the men and hold here. When we see you're in position, we'll swoop down from both sides, surrounding them."
"As you wish."
Marek placed his fingers to the front of his mast as a salute to Pontifex.
"My lord."
He did the same to Orland.
"Councillor."
Then he was off. Pontifex looked at the warrior with resentment. When he saw the smile on Orland's face, he changed his mind. Marek was smart. He had learned from Pontifex, and his gesture of recognition to the new councillor would set the man at ease, making him easier to manipulate, or kill when the time came. A feeling of tremendous pride filled the Vedalken lord, and he smiled. Without even a word, his trusted bodyguard had picked up the plan and played along perfectly. Lifting the handle in his glider towards the clouds, Pontifex rose higher and made a gentle curving turn.
"Where are we going?"
asked Orland beside his leader.
"Nowhere," replied Pontifex, steering around. "We're circling our prey."
"What they doing, huh?" asked Slobad. "Looks like they're splitting up." All 4 intently watched the flying figures as they broke up into 2 smaller groups. One appeared to be retreating. Slobad tugged on Glissa's arm. "They leaving? Scared of Slobad and his golem, huh?"
"No, they're trying to surround us,"
said the wolf. Glissa felt panic fill her chest. They were out in the open. The only thing they could possibly use for cover was a large patch of razor grass that looked as if it had been recently mowed down by a gang of hungry thrashers. If they ran hard, they could reach the fuller patch of grass, but even if they made it, they'd have to fight both the Vedalken and the sharp-edged foliage. "What do we do?" she asked, more to the heavens than anyone in particular.
"We run, huh?"
Glissa looked up at the flyers. Already the splinter group was nearly overhead. The other group had completed a full circle and was beginning a second. "No, they move too fast. We'll never outrun them." Bosch's voice rumbled in the light breeze.
"We might be able to get out from in between them. That might give us a better chance. If only we had to fight half of them at a time."
"That's a good idea. Under the glare of the moons, it'll be hard for them to see us. If we near a patch of grazing grass and stick close together, that could buy us some time."
"Let's go then," shouted Glissa. Bosch grabbed Slobad and deposited once again on his shoulders, and then the group was off. Glissa rode Al-Hayat, and Slobad held onto the iron golem's collar for dear life. They skirted the edge of a razor grass field, galloping at full speed. Bosch's huge metal feet pounded out a drumbeat as they ran. Al-Hayat moved silently, with fluid grace of an organic creature. Glissa squeezed the great forest beast with her knees and clutched handfuls of fur, trying to stay on his back. They narrowly outpaced the metal golem, running along beside the small patch of razor grass. Looking up into the sky, Glissa's heart plunged into her stomach. They're coming right for us! The first few strides had moved them past the splinter group of gliders, but the other half had seen them try to run. They dived now to intercept. A deep, hollow whistle followed, louder the closer they came. They're going to ram us, she shouted. Al-Hayat planted his front feet and came to a sudden, abrupt halt. Glissa couldn't squeeze hard enough with her knees, and her rear end lifted off the creature's back. If not for the solid grip she had on his hair, she would have been tossed right over. Bosch came stomping up right beside.
Why are we stopping?
Glissa watched the gliders getting closer. They were almost on top of the foursome, but there was nowhere to go. In seconds they would be smashed into the ground, or pushed into the razor grass and cut to bits.
For this?
Said the wolf. Al-Hayat closed his eyes and then muttered something under his breath. To Glissa, it felt as if the wolf was vibrating. She couldn't hear what he said, but she could feel every syllable. Looking into the sky, she could see the gliders, make out the construction, recognize every detail on the warriors' faces. She drew her sword. I won't die like this, she shouted and lifted her blade into the air. Al-Hayat stopped his rumbling and opened his eyes. A swirling green ball of energy shot out from the wolf, striking the razor grass field. Like the magic he used to cure the goblin, the spell settled onto the metal foliage in a puddle, nearly as large as the creature who cast it, soaking into the ground as if it were water. The whistling noise the gliders put off grew to a horrific screech, and the Vedalken guiding them pulled back, bringing forward charged lances and glowing blue heads. The glider cast their shadow over the group, blotting out the converging moons. The magical blades swung down on Glissa, Al-Hayat, Bosch, and Slobad. The patch of razor grass touched by the wolf's spell grew up to meet the Vedalken's halberds. The sharp blades climbed high over the travellers, reaching farther in the air than the elf's extended blade, overtopping even the iron golem. Glissa felt a warm splash as 3 of the glider pilots were skewered by the still-growing grass. She ducked her head, shielding herself from anything that might fall from the sky, and hoping that Al-Hayat's magic wouldn't let any of the gliders get through. Gurgling screams and cries of pain filled the air, as the 3 front glider pilots were smashed from behind by their comrades, forcing them deeper into the reaching spikes. The misfortune of the vanguard saved the rest of the flight from certain death, and the remaining pilots pulled up, landing on the plain before the foursome. The companions wasted no time, engaging the pilots as they unhooked themselves from their artifact wings. Glissa slipped sideways off Al-Hayat, charging out from under the growing razor grass to slash a Vedalken warrior across the gut, while his arms were still enmeshed in his backpack. The wolf followed, snapping up a blue-skinned, 4-armed warrior in his mouth and clamping down, making the Vedalken look like nothing more than a tasty snack. The warrior's powered lance gleamed brightly, falling from the wielder's hands as he was summarily devoured by the wolf. Its bright blue beam mixed with the colours of Mirrodin's many moons as it reflected off the plain, turning the swirling brown light into something closer to purple. The sound of metal clashing on metal rose over the plains. Bosch and Slobad came out from under the razor grass. The island golem pounded a pilot into a pile of broken glider flesh and bones, which sizzled on the hot hexagonal plates. The goblins stayed near the golem, taunting the Vedalken into attacking, letting the big metal man do all the work. For having been backed into a corner, thought Glissa, the opening few moments of the battle were going quite well. Another heavy shadow passed over the winged warriors, momentarily blocking out the mixed colours of the overhead moons. The temporary shade was accompanied by a deep, hollow whistle. The second group of gliders had arrived. Pontifex landed on the plains behind his elite guards. This was preposterous. 3 glider pilots killed by a patch of razor grass? Razor grass. Had none of these trained soldiers grown up on Mirrodin? What child did not know to get caught up in those killing blades? The Vedalken lord shrugged his glider from his shoulders and unhooked his sword from his hip. Unlike most conventional blades, Pontifex was less like a sword and more like a crysknife. The sharpened length jutted out from a straight, leather-wrapped hilt, but from there it began to curve. The blade formed an S, as if it were a slithering snake, finally ending in a deadly, jagged head. Next to him, Councillor Orland was having trouble unfastening his glider from his shoulders. The Clod had obviously never been in battle before, living a soft life inside Lumingrid. Pontifex thought briefly about stabbing the man in the gut right there, on the open plain, while his arms were tangled, but he stayed his own hand. The time would come when he could do that in a much more private setting. Judging from Orland's twisting and wrenching display as he tried to free himself from the glider, it wouldn't be too hard to kill the bumbling politician even if his hands were free. Marek and his group of gliders would land and join the fight in a moment. The 24 pilots Pontifex had come to the ground with were circling the elf girl and her comrades, but their numbers had dwindled. 6 were down already, including the 3 who had been killed with the growing razor grass. The Vedalken Lord didn't want to have to wade in himself, but if it came to that he would. Nothing was going to stop him from getting that elf. Somehow the girl had tarnished his image as a leader to the people. She had stormed through their fortress, committed the sacrilege of swimming in the pool of knowledge, and escaped without punishment. But that wasn't worst of it. Somehow, that bitch had managed to get between him and his god. Had managed to make him insignificant in the eyes of the Guardian. For that, she must die. Glissa fought for her life. The Vedalken carried halberds, long, thick blades attached to even longer poles, so that a warrior could reach out and attack an opponent from a distance. The heads of these weapons coursed with power, and 2 came right at her legs as a pair of warriors leaned in. Her back up against the razorgrass field, all she could do was bat them away. Again and again, the sharp, glowing blue points came at her, and each time she knocked them away. Bosch leaned out with his long arms, able to match the Vedalken warriors with his reach. Glissa felt the impact as his hand hit the ground, a smashed foe underneath. He swung down with his other fist, punching a guardsman in the face. The warrior was thrown, loosing his grip on his weapon and falling on his back. Despite the heavy impact, the soldier got to his feet, dazed and shaking his head, but alive. Bosch lifted his hand for another strike. Large droplets of blood dripped from between his clenched fingers, splashing on the hot metal ground. The liquid sent up a short wisp of smoke, as it quickly dried. In the strange mixed light, Glissa couldn't tell if it was blue blood of the Vedalken warrior or the red blood of the now fleshy golem. The thought of Bosch bleeding to death brought a sudden chill to the elf's spine. 2 more halberds came from nowhere, forcing Glissa to spine to one side. Unlike the other weapons the Vedalken had been using, these did not have sharp heads. Instead, they sprouted loops of heavy wire, meant to ensnare rather than wound. One of these loops lunged for Glissa, and she narrowly managed to duck under it. The warrior who carried it had the handle near the end of the shaft, and pulled on it now. The loop tightened just as the elf pulled away. "What am I? A wild boar?" she shouted. The Vedalken answered by lunging in with another thrust of their pointy weapons. These too Glissa pounded away, but this time she managed to counterattack. Not bothering to aim for any one warrior in particular, the elf jabbed the tip of her powerful blade into the throng of blue-skinned guardsmen. The tip momentarily caught one of the warrior's robes, then tore free, sending her tripping forward. Losing her balance, the elf lifted up onto her tiptoes on her right foot. She could feel her weight dragging her forward. The thought of landing prone before 4 warriors, all of whom wanted her dead, had absolutely no appeal to the young elf, and she struggled to stay upright. With her left leg held up in front of her, she toppled forward. Skipping once and then reaching out, she jabbed her sword point into the nearest warrior, hoping to push herself back and regain her balance. But the head of the sharp weapon punctured the Vedalken's armor and slipped through into soft flesh. The creature screamed, turned sideways, and pulled away. The hole in the warrior's armor now twisted to one side, clamped down on the tip of Glissa's blade, trapping it and dragging the elf further forward. Glissa was extended as far as she could go, and she held onto her sword with all of her might. Reaching over, she grabbed the pommel with both hands, letting her toes slide across the hot metallic ground as the Vedalken pulled back. Warrior and elf moved as a pair, the tip of Glissa's sword still lodged in the Vedalken's chest. The injured fighters struggled to free themselves, flailing in all four of his spindly arms. Blood now covered the blue ornamental robes he wore over his armor, looking like a dark brown stain on light brown robes in the mixed light of the converging moons. Then his struggle slowed, and he looked at the elf through his visor. His eyes were sad, even frightened, and Glissa felt a pang of pity. The warrior collapsed, dropping to his knees. Glissa was yanked forward, and she watched the ground come up towards her face. This is it, she thought. Something grabbed hold of her left foot, still lifted high into the air, and she was tugged back. She watched two halberd blades and a heavy wire loop strike the ground. The enchanted weapon cut into the metal plates of the plane, leaving huge gouges beside the dying Vedalken, right where she would have been lying face down. Coming to the ground on both feet, Glissa turned back to see her saviour, Slowbird. His bony hands were wrapped around her ankle, but he lost his grip and fell backwards from the force of his tugging her free of the dying Vedalken. She wanted to thank him, but there wasn't any time. More warriors pressed in. Marek trained to the ground right beside Pontifex. His 24 glider pilots landed closer to the melee. His elite guard commander shucked his glider wings and crossed over to the two Vedalken synod members.
Counselor,
He said to Orland, bowing his head slightly. He turned to Pontifex.
my lord, we were trying to pin them between the two groups. I fear I have failed you.
Pontifex shook the comment off.
Nonsense, you flushed them right into our hands.
Marek nodded. Pontifex looked over at his bodyguard's shoulder at the fighting. The elf and her companions were still backed up against the razorgrass field, but the Vedalken warriors had made little progress in capturing Glissa. Pontifex gripped his sword tightly. Marek took another shallow bow.
I bid you farewell. I will capture the elf and bring her to you.
The warrior turned on his heels and marched towards the battle.
Kill her,
said Pontifex, his teeth clenched. Marek stopped in his tracks. Orland turned to the Vedalken lord, and a look of utter astonishment on his face.
Kill her? You can't be serious.
Pontifex grabbed Orland by the collar of his robes, forcing the gangly politician's visor up against his own.
Quite.
Marek stepped closer.
Are we not to return the elf girl to Mebnarch? My lord?
He added late. Pontifex glared into Orland's eyes, not letting the councillor loose. He spoke to Marek.
Plans have changed. The Guardian no longer wants her.
Orland shifted his eyes. Pontifex followed his gaze to Marek.
He's not going to help you,
he shouted at his captive.
I am not your enemy, Lord Pontifex,
claimed the councillor.
Please let me go.
Marek stood watching the scene. Pontifex could see him in the corner of his eye.
What are you waiting for, Marek? Go kill the elf girl.
Marek nodded.
As you wish, my lord.
This time he was more forthwith with the title.
But I would not be doing my duty to you if I did not ask you to reconsider.
Orland squirmed in Pontifex's grip. The Vedalken lord, using his superior height, lifted the councillor up off of his footing, forcing the politician to stand on his toes or be strangled by his own robe, now bunching around his neck.
Thank you, Marek, but no little elf girl is going to get between me and the Guardian of Mirrodin. Neither is the elected synod councillor.
He finally took his eyes off Orland, loosening his grip on the man's robe and letting him get back onto his feet under him.
Kill her.
Marek didn't even blink before he turned and sprinted towards the melee. Pontifex watched him as he rallied his men and headed off, following his orders to the letter.
He's good, Marek is,
he said to Orland, who was now trying to soothe his damaged throat.
Very good.